Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Art of the Card. I'm Joe with Bubblegum and Leather. I'm joined by Chris of Big Red Bat Sports Cards. Chris, how are we doing today?
Doing good, Joe. Doing good.
Good to be with you. Good to be talking about cards. Today, we're going to take a quick look at the 1991 Skybox basketball set. This is a very popular set. I know that I collected these cards as a kid. Even just the base cards were kind of like a big deal to me growing up, and I was actually quite excited to acquire these cards as part of my collection growing up. Has a pretty large pop count on PSA. You know, a lot of these cards have been graded. The Michael Jordan is very well known. These boxes, the wax boxes, are still readily available on eBay at a pretty accessible price. I think that we're all pretty familiar with these cards as collectors. Some of us maybe more than others. Chris, did you find these cards growing up in your collection? Were they popular to trade with the friends that you had that were in the hobby?
Yeah, no, my first love of Skybox was the classic, like the bronze bordered ones with the colored pattern. I think
Yeah.
that was what was that, the year before this? Or
Yes.
I
Yes.
believe
So the
it's
bronze border cards,
91.
yeah, the bronze border cards were the 1990 Skybox. They just looked that up
Yeah,
just
so the
quickly.
year, yeah, so the year prior to this, so that was kind of like my first love of Skybox and what they were doing. I thought those are also some of the most iconic cards of the hobby, even though there's a lot of them as well. But this was really cool because this 91 set really put an emphasis on the player, I thought.
Mm.
And when you're a kid, we're looking at it now through a different lens than we were as a kid. But I think still understanding that the prominent feature was the player that we all liked. So, you know, and the shapes that are behind these players are pretty interesting and they've changed, which we'll get into, some of that here. I know you have some pulled. So yeah, I thought it was a great set. They're not like super rare by any means, but I think a must have for any card collector out there, I think. So
Not sure if there's a more iconic set in early basketball outside of maybe '86 Fleer than that gold bordered skybox. When you look at those kind of side by side, focusing on the '91 set with the white background, these really do stand out. I think in a way that's surprisingly more colorful. Which if you would have told me in 1990, like, hey, just wait till next year, these cards will get even cooler looking, I would not have believed you. But against the white background, these colors really do start to sing, and they really start to come off the card in a way that's different from the dark backgrounds and that gold border.
mhm.
Um, uh,
A quick note about that, I
yes.
think, as you were talking, made me think like, if you think about this, the cards when you're designing this, right? This isn't happening like a month out from when these cards release. There's a lot of time that goes into this. So in the 80s, the bronze border with that background, still bold colors that the 80s is known for, but also a little more subdued, letting that player kind of shine through. But with these shapes that you see on the 91, where it's some of that new 3D technology is like
Mhm.
first being introduced in digital gaming or videos or like movies and stuff, like I think it starts to, they're probably saying, hey, this is a new technology that we didn't really explore before in the 80s so much, or as much. Obviously it was around, and has continued to evolve today, but like, so I think that kind of is it's an interesting moment of time of shifting of design, and I think it's kind of cool and representative of that new technology in that era. So
I think this is a great example of that. We kind of talked before we started this episode in our kind of debrief about some of the advertising for, like, video game consoles, in the '80s, and where you would start to see some of these 3D shapes and some of these rendered graphics that were
mhm.
new and novel at the time. Um, I think about the images from the '70s, right, where you saw like the server room. It was like, this is how much processing power it took to like send a single email or a fax in like
Mhm.
1977. It's like, I'd like to see the processor room for what it took to develop the graphics on the '91 Skybox set.
Yeah,
How many computers did we have up and running to get that accomplished? Because it looks
yeah,
great. I think at
yeah.
that point in time, we tend to think about 8-bit graphics or 16-bit graphics, right? Again, kind of going to a video game analogy. The images that we see on these cards, I think this is a great example. Actually, I'll hold up the Byron Scott card, right, and where this is a very, very highly detailed 3D rendering, right? I mean, that's a very like monolithic kind of style element there, kind of hanging out in the background, but it's very crisp. You'll notice
Yep.
that the gradient there, the contour, it's very smooth. You know, it's very specific. We have some nice highlights around the edges as well to provide a greater sense of shape in the space. And for me, what it reminds me of as well is science fiction graphics, right? The illustrations that you would have seen, I think, in the 60s and 70s, that, you know, seeing kind of elements like this, like these kind of rods, you know, that are kind of coming out and that have 3D shape,
Hmm.
I feel like that'd be very similar to something you might see on a science fiction book cover, right, or something along
It
those
reminds
lines.
me. It reminds me of Ghost Rider. Do you
Yes,
remember that
yes,
TV
yes,
show where
yes.
that's like they go through the tubes and it's like, or Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? I feel like futuristic to like there was going to be tubes in the future, right? That was like what that is, and transporting you through time or a place, and so it's cool that that card was used in that way. It made me think of Ghost Rider in the 90s.
I think it has a specific place. You know, I think there's some nostalgia, but it's these cards definitely feel firmly entrenched, right, in 1991 in the best
Hmm.
possible way. I think they're forward looking when we look at the clarity of the graphics, right, and where we've seen computers and video game processors, right. We've seen
Hmm.
how game, excuse me, motion graphics cards. I'll use the right
Hmm.
terminology here so nobody gets offended, but we've seen how technology has advanced, right?
Yeah.
And this is actually a really great precursor of, um, you know, if I were to open up Photoshop today or After Effects or some other 3D engine, you know, to kind of create some of these graphics, I'm not sure I would have a higher resolution output. That's pretty cool because we've seen how
Yeah.
far, right? Again, the processing power has come in the last 25 years, um, 30 years. That being said, you know, they do feel a little dated in a very fun way. And
Yeah.
it's enjoyable to look back on a design like this that has really stood the test of time. I think this starts to get to the heart of kind of why we collect, right? When I get excited about base cards, I think that the card manufacturer has done something right. Don't again, not here to talk about value, but we all have those boxes of base cards that I think we just don't know what to do with.
Hmm.
And these are cards that I want to get more of them, right? I would love to personally assemble a full set of the Skybox releases because they're just a joy to look through, and they're a joy to see the range of styles
Hmm.
that the designers were able to implement. I have several of the cards spread out here before me for
Yeah.
reference.
Hold some more up, and we
And
can
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of.
yeah. I really like some of the shapes here where we get some of these really strong geometric shapes. These angles, again, kind of giving us a perspective on top and bottom.
Hmm.
Great image selection here too, Chris. Kind of like what you were talking about, where it really kind of creates an interesting emphasis on the player because we're cropping that player out. Same as the previous year's set of the Skybox. But again, putting it on the white background, I feel like it does elevate the player. It's a little bit more of a refined approach, right?
Hmm.
Putting them on white space instantly kind of makes it feel a little bit more refined. And so some of these are really cool, and how they highlight how they highlight the players. One of my favorites, Scott Brooks. Right? Look at that! Look at that card. He's coming right at you. He's coming right at you,
Yeah.
Chris. Are you ready?
Yeah.
I think it's great, right? The photography really lends itself into the design. There are several of these cards where I'll see the same elements, say like a star, you know, or maybe those big kind of chunky blocks from earlier. This is one
Hmm.
that I haven't seen in my collection of about, I don't know, 60 or 80 of these cards,
Hmm.
but it's almost, you know, perfectly matched to the photo,
Yep.
and you know, this would be a good chicken or the egg deep dive, right? Which came first on this card? Did the picture come first and the illustration augmented it, or was this, you know, was this just a template that felt like it was missing a picture of someone passing the
Passing.
basketball in
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
way, right? And so really enjoy the creativity and the use of these elements in really interesting ways. But they also mirror the action in the shot. I think the third element here as well is, of course, the trail, right? That kind of glowing that again was introduced with Skybox in the '90s set. This to me, NBA Jam, you know what I mean? The later iterations of Fleer, I believe,
Hmm.
that leverage this. The glowing puck, you know, from the hockey broadcasts in the mid 90s,
Yeah.
right? Again, this
Yeah.
feels very dated in the best possible way. I absolutely love it. Um, I
Well,
hope,
also too, like not to get too nerdy, like the scale of the shapes complement the player photography really well. It's
absolutely.
not either one isn't too big or too small for the other on these. Like even if it's like one singular element, it fits with that photo that they selected. So yeah, it's just really well done.
I'm not familiar with William Bedford's work all that much. I've got to think, you know, this is probably one of the coolest cars that he's ever had, right? I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of just
Yeah.
again how it highlights his action, highlights kind of him in a very interesting way. One of the other cool qualities about these cars is you get this kind of lifestyle photo on the back. Most of them, I love the
Hmm.
energy here and how they've laid this out. Very nice approach to the elements where we have these two juxtaposed lines creating some tension. I love the creativity there to take the actual stat line, take those numbers and put it at a pretty harsh angle. I don't think that's quite 45 degrees, but that looks like a good little 30-degree tilt there. That's going to get your attention. That's going to draw your eye down there. And I'm sure somebody. I'm sure someone was opposed to that. I'll put that lightly. I think that's a pretty big push creatively from the designer to say, hey, we're going to take this kind of very technical linear information, we're actually going to put it at an angle. And then to take these harsh geometric shapes we see on the back with these really sharp edges, to juxtapose that, contrast that with these little nice dots and these other elements, it makes it feel interesting. I get a sense of tension without it feeling very cluttered or
Hmm.
crowded, which is a great accomplishment. And again, allows these full images, unobstructed images, to really sing. There's some cool pictures on the backs of these.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think on you have a prototype card, I believe, that had an
Yeah. So
interesting picture on the back.
I was digging through some value boxes at a show, and I came across a Mitch Richmond and Dennis Scott. You
Nice.
can see like this Mitch Richmond one's just awesome with that swoop there.
Yeah, yeah,
And on the back, I noticed that it says prototype. So, I figured we would be talking about these, and the same thing with the Dennis Scott. You can see.
fantastic.
And I think there's like I realized on the Skybox series before too, there's a prototype Jordan that actually has a whole different photo.
Hmm.
So I don't know if you have the Dennis Scott or Mitch Richmond laying around if they change the front image like they did on the year prior with the Jordan,
Let me
um,
see.
but yeah, no. So I thought it was just kind of cool to have like what were those prototypes sent out in. I don't not familiar. I'm sure somebody knows out there. So if somebody's watching, put in the comments. That would be awesome if you know why some of these Skybox cards have prototypes, or were these from like somebody that worked for the manufacturer, and
Hmm.
like similar to what like Terry mentioned on our
That's right.
conversation with him, where he would get sent like blank backs of those provisions. Was that what these were from? Because I can't imagine maybe they would put out prototype packs like out into the
Right, right.
shops and stuff. So
That's a great point.
um,
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a press proof in the traditional sense that we find as like
yeah.
an actual chase card, or insert card.
Hmm.
Um, but at the same time, it brings up an interesting point. We mentioned at the start that this has a decent pop count on PSA, and I think that for instance, this Loy Vaught card, right? I think it'd be very interesting to see how these are graded. These cards are so colorful, and the eye really draws you into the subject matter. But it's a little bit
Hmm.
hard to see, right? How accurately this card is centered, how accurately this card could be graded. It
Hmm.
creates an interesting challenge. I think, again, in a good way, in a kind of fun way. That's different from some of these other sets, like this one, where we have the illustration more or less aligned with the subject, but the subject may
Hmm.
not be perfectly centered on the card. Does that
Yep.
then mean that it receives a poor grade or not? So,
Yep.
I think that there's a lot to unearth here about what would we have been looking for in a prototype card, right? Are we
Hmm.
looking for these cards being centered, or would we be looking for color and clarity? Kind of going back to Terry's point about some of the work that he did with the San Jose Sharks, and of course his work with his actual paint, that he used
Hmm.
on his illustrated cards for Fleer, bringing color into the 90s, was a big deal. And he really led the charge on that in a big way. But I think that these are a great example of not only increased rendering capabilities, but you have also increased production capabilities with these companies that are able to print high quality glossy cards with a really, really nice hit of color, very vibrant output in a way
Mm-hmm.
that they maybe couldn't do 5 or 6 years prior.
Yeah, I mean, even think about like 90, I think it's 90 hoops or
Mm-hmm.
like, you know what I mean? Like it's just not as I love the look. It's got this
Yeah.
iconic like, arch that the player sits in. I think they're cool. But the colors and the print doesn't pop as much on those cards as this does. I
Mm-hmm.
think going back to your centering comment, the two things that seem to be consistent are the team logo on the right and where their name starts on the left.
Mm-hmm.
I've
Mm-hmm.
noticed just in the ones that you've shared and the two that I have sitting in front of me, the Skybox logo moves around based on the
Yes.
content on the image. So,
That's an
um,
interesting point. I can see that as I've actually looked. You know what's really interesting to me, as you mentioned that not only does it move around, right? Take a look at these two, but look how also it's modular between its horizontal
mm,
orientation and its vertical orientation. That's really
yeah,
cool. That's really cool. I love, as a graphic designer, any sort of brand that I would suggest, for like a logo, like a Skybox. We always want to think about what does that look like in a horizontal application, and then what happens if you have to
hmm,
display that vertically. Sometimes you do just rotate it 90 degrees, and that's the solution, and that's fine. Other times, it's a rework of that. In this instance, we see that the logo is able to be read from top to bottom, and
hmm,
of course, gives us a greater range of how we lock up these layouts. Not just with the logo, but you can also see how they're taking that same star element and implementing it in different ways. So even we've seen a range of excuse me, we have seen a range of geometric elements. But even
hmm,
within those elements, there's some creativity into how those are applied or how those are used. So a really, really nice visual range within this set. I would be fascinated to learn how many designers worked on this. It feels like the effort of a team. That being said, if you told me one person, worked on this and had the runway to dream all of this up, I would believe you because it is very cohesive, right? It makes sense.
hmm.
There's a logic that flows throughout this, even when we get into some of the inserts, which I'd love to hold up next. Any other thoughts on the base cards, Chris? Any ones that stood out to you in particular as we did a little bit of research?
No, I just think they're all like really interesting. I mean, as you held up that coach's card, I think is that Jerry Sloan
That
that you
is
were
Jerry
holding
with the
up?
with the X's and O's, man.
Yeah, like it's just cool that like also you don't see coaches cards anymore. That was something that I in the like I would when I was ripping a bunch of boxes of 91 Fleer, pulling like Chuck Daly's and like all these coaches cards. It's kind of cool. They don't have those anymore.
Right.
That
Well,
I'd
and
I'd be interested to know like what I don't even know like when did they stop implementing coaches into the cards?
I
You
like that
know,
it is thematic. It's not just a picture of Jerry. Like that it's actually got these X's and O's. Like if I
yeah,
pulled a Phil Jackson card, am I going to see a triangle like that? That'd be cool, right? Like I would
yeah.
love that. And so I think that it's nice that there's a little bit extra thought that goes into these. The backs are a little bit different than what we saw earlier on the player base cards, but it does give them a nice, again, nice picture of Jerry there, a little bit of a ride up. Again, continuing that X's
Hmm.
and O's themes, I kind of like how dynamic this background is. Again, not easy to read, over top there. That's kind of a nice little nod to the '90s, right? But a cool card nonetheless. Very fun card to look at, and definitely, I think we saw the introduction of the coaches cards back into football this year. I recall seeing a lot of Mike Vrabel cards floating around. And Mike Vrabel's a cool guy, but I have no desire for a Mike Vrabel card. If it's just a picture of a coach on the sideline. If it's a little bit more interesting, I think in this instance, especially if it becomes more cohesive with the rest of the set, which is also conceptual, you now have my attention, and I'm much more likely to try to include those cards as part of my PC.
Yeah, I have bad news, Joe. The Phil Jackson does not feature the triangle. It
That
has
is a missed opportunity. A missed
I just
opportunity.
I just looked it up. I kind of want one now. I didn't.
Well, I know that
um,
this set has two waves. I know there's a series one and a series two. We may have to undergo a series three in order to right this grave injustice.
Yeah, yeah, no, there it has the X's and O's. He's standing, and I'll put it up on the screen.
Yes,
He's got
yes.
you see a little suspender. He's got his suit jacket open, hands in the pockets, uh, white background with like a pinkish color with some X's and O's flying around. But it's a cool card.
Well,
I do have the 91 Fleer Phil Jackson. As I mentioned, I've opened a lot of boxes. So I have that in a stack of my 91 Fleer, but might have to collect the Phil Jackson coaches cards. I don't know.
that could be a fun little short print set. The coaches
Yeah.
cards from the '91, Skybox. I'd love to see how they look side by side. Um,
Yeah.
I think, like I said, all these cards I'm really kind of interested in collecting more of. Um, but I do have a few of the inserts we can look at too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Pull those up.
Again, it's kind of funny because like honestly, every single card kind of feels like an insert because they're all so unique. But one of the things that I think Skybox did really well, as we start to differentiate between the base and the short prints, obviously we see some of these kind of career accomplishments, or this Mr. Lester Connor, which a career steal to turnover ratio acknowledgement. Here we see
Hmm.
numbers, starting to come in. We still have a little bit of that kind of 3D render effect in the stats, kind of bubbles, but it does become a
Hmm.
little bit more flat and layered, a little bit more kind of traditional design. I might call that. I do think the cards look nice. We actually get the NBA logo man down there in the bottom left for me as I hold the card.
Yep.
Okay, good. Um, and I like how they've incorporated this. It does become a little bit more busy. I think that there's a little bit of a disconnect, right? When we look at like a card like this side by side. I mean, honestly, the base card I think looks better,
Yep.
just from a purely objective standpoint. But in
Hmm.
terms of, again, communicating that this is a different card and that it's a statistical accomplishment, I think it does it very well. I also have a Chris Mullen card here too, where you can kind of see how that theme's carried out. The overlay does create a sense of depth and some really nice colors. But again, the 3D renderings that are kind of the hallmark of this set are minimal on these cards. Um, Best game single performance is kind of interesting though, where it is again that it's a little bit hard to tell. I'll zoom this in just a little bit, but you can see on the best that gold. They've done a bit of a bevel, and an emboss effect on there to give that kind of 3D rendering. Um,
Hmm.
what's interesting to me is the typography isn't super, it's not as far out as the rest of the graphics are. It's actually pretty
More of a
expected.
traditional kind of typeface. Yeah.
It is, and even here on these stat leaders, right? It's not anything that's really too disruptive or anything that's too new. So it's a kind of interesting, just to have it all spread out before me here and to kind of see these. They do stand out a little bit. The backs are very nice. The backs again start to get a little bit more thematic with what we've seen already.
Hmm.
Geographic elements, 3D rendered, soft gradients, soft colors, but very vibrant when pulled all together. Angles and shapes working together to create tension. So I think my favorite out of these kind of this set, the rookie team, very unique container for the R. We've become very accustomed to that standard RC look.
Hmm.
Basketball, I think, in the '90s actually probably had the most expansive approach to designating different rookie sets or rookie cards. This is one I had forgot about until we went through the cards for today's episode. And I really like this R shape, man. This is wild. Where did that come from? What does it even mean? I don't know, but I want it. I love it. Pretty cool little setup. I think
Do you have any other rookies in that set in front of you
I don't. This is
or
the
of that
only
set?
one, so I'm gonna have to hunt down some more of these. I think that it strikes a good balance here of having some topography, right? Kind of having like, look, we can't just put shapes out there. We've got to communicate something a little bit more.
Yep.
So yeah, we're gonna pull in some fonts. The fonts in 1991 are not like the topographic options that we have at our disposal in 2022, but they found a way to make this interesting for it to feel a little bit more cohesive, I think, than some of those other insert cards that we just looked at. So really nice here, and again, very similar back to what we saw before, with the inclusion of a photo along with the write up.
Very cool. Yeah, the also, and I don't know if you have any available to hold up. If not, we can put some on the screen. But like the Barcelona cards from that year, also for the Olympics coming up the year after,
So I
are
actually
pretty cool.
have. Yeah, actually, that's
because everybody has an individual card. I'm looking at like the Jordan one. Everything's just like really cool and clean, and it's like embodies the Olympics and that feeling of like Team USA. That was like the dream team, right? Like, um, it's a cool card of how they've done this for all the players too.
I don't have any of the Barcelona cards. I did just take a quick look through, and unfortunately, I don't. I have a lot of these base cards and a handful of these inserts, but I don't have the Barcelona cards. Nor do I have the Jordan card either. One of the more well-known inserts of this set being the Skymaster card as well, where you get the
Hmm.
Chicago skyline in the background.
Yep.
There are some really, really nice additional inserts that I'm seeing as we go through some of the listings on eBay. I think that the Barcelona set is a great example of kind of, again, pushing this to a unique level while still incorporating these elements to making it feel like a cohesive set. It
Yep.
was an exciting time in basketball, right? You had the age of these superstars. You had a lot more people paying attention to cards in general. You kind of have this pop culture element of things being more fun, more loud, more colorful, and it kind of really all comes together in the Skybox set from
Yep.
1991.
Yeah, and the other cool thing too is there's like team cards with that. It's carrying that shape through as well. So I'm looking at like I'll pull it up on the screen. A Chicago. It just says Chicago, and it has Jordan and Pippen talking, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
cool looking card. And I've noticed like there's a I think Topps Baseball. I've seen some like team cards recently in recent years, but it seemed like the team cards or duo cards really were a kind of staple in 90s sports cards that you're not seeing a ton of anymore rather than just like a photo capturing a team. But it was like whether it's like Thunder and Lightning, or I have like an East West Anthony Hardaway, Damon Stoudemire dual sided card
Mm-hmm.
from, you know, like an All Star game when they were on the East and West team. There's a Kobe and Jordan one of that, which I know goes for a lot. But I like every time there's like dual players or like showing something just more than a player. I think those cards are interesting too. So
No,
it's good to see that in
you
the
know what,
Chicago one.
you know what I think stands out is the team logo cards, right? Like that feels
Yeah, those are
very
cool.
like 1985 to 1995. You know, like that felt very time specific. And I
Hmm.
did pull up to circle back just briefly. I pulled up those Barcelona cards, Chris, and I love the way again that they've merged these elements in the kind of 3D rendering. I get this kind of decision 2020 vibe
Hmm.
from these cards with like the 3D stars and stripes floating around in the background. It feels like I've stepped into CNN's election room coverage, and I mean that in kind of a cool way. Again, in that these cards are 30 years old, and they still feel like they've just absolutely nailed the aesthetic in terms of things that are still very familiar and culturally relevant right now today. Again, I think that approach to the kind of patriotism, the stars and stripes element, and pulling them in and being creative with them the same way they are with just the generic shapes, the geometric
Hmm.
shapes, really creates another outstanding short print set within this group.
Yeah, and then there's also too like Skybox salutes card.
I haven't
Like
seen
I'm looking
those.
at like a Jordan one where he's dunking and it's got like a wave that says salutes with some shapes on it. That's pretty cool. I'll pull that up on the screen when we have this air. Um, yeah, there's like a Michael versus Magic.
Yes, I've seen that card. I think that's one of the higher pop count cards. But again, you got all sorts of little cool, like geometric kind of little
Yeah.
accents floating around as you got two of the great ones um, going head to head. Again, I think that
Yeah.
the photography is really strong throughout this whole set. I mean, it really is. I mean, these are really cool action shots. And when you clip
Yep.
out that background and let that white space breathe, these are fun to look at. These are fun to go through.
Hmm. Including the like great moments from the NBA Finals.
Mm.
There's like a team shot of like Jordan and some other players. It looks like Pippen and like Bill Cartwright, and they're celebrating. There's Jordan with the trophy, which is a cool card. I have that in my Jordan stack of cards. So these are, yeah, they're just like, I think they, as we talked about again with Terry, like cards representing a moment in time. I think, I don't know of a set that captures so much moments of time, um, unless it's like a photo of a specific event, like we were talking before of like the David Ortiz 9/11
Mm-hmm,
card that
mm-hmm.
that was a monumental moment of time that people
Right.
remember. And that card is him on the field of that like first game back at Fenway. And so these cards embody like an era of a time period. Like it gives me like what's to come of video games, as you were hinting at earlier, like N64. Like it gives me very like Star Fox vibes, like
Mm-hmm.
that very
Mm-hmm.
geometric 3D, like forward thinking technology that was brand new and exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah,
Well,
it's a really cool set. So
I think that geometric shapes, to get very granular with it, right? This is how new technology is first executed on. This would be your first approach, right, on a big computer rendering. Before I would go and render, say a 3D image of a flower, I'm going to start with a 3D circle or a 3D square and see if I can do that
mhm,
first, right? And we saw that in video games, with N64, to your point about some of these kind of more rudimentary graphics. But we see it also when platforms roll out, like the Wii platform, right? And you get these games that are just like, I'm just going to be a ball that rolls around and like picks things up, right? It's just like very basic kind of engine, graphics engine
mhm,
rendering, kind of projects. And if we can do this basic level stuff first, well, then we can go and create a hyper realistic image of a person
mhm,
or an object. And so this is, I think, a really great kind of signal, right, of where graphics are headed. Um, Whether it intended to be or not, looking back in retrospect, it feels very prophetic, right?
mhm,
To look at these basic shapes, see how they were pushed with color, with scale, and really see that play out kind of over and over again at every step that we've made with technology and with our processing power. It's a really great, almost like kind of time capsule in a way, but
mhm.
it's incredibly forward thinking, and it's proven to, I think, be one of the most interesting sets that we have an opportunity to look at when we kind of consider the modern era of cards that people have access to.
Yeah.
That are still very, very, have a lot of interest and desire from a collection standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. No, your early point when we first started the episode of like you want to collect more of these, whereas maybe like the red bordered Don Russ cards, it's like I'll give them away to like
Yeah, yeah,
wherever,
yeah,
whoever will take them,
yeah,
or we'll
yeah.
use them in a fire, outside
Yep,
or
yep,
something,
yep.
Um, these are just like, yeah, they're interesting to look at that moment of time. Oh, I love what you said about showing what's to come,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
because that's what a lot of this stuff in that era was, right?
Yeah.
It's yeah, really well done, and I'm glad we talked about this set. It was a fun episode to go through.
Yeah, I would love to get the full set of these cards, and for several other, of our episodes coming up, right? As we continue to have episodes that are kind of light touches and just a brief conversation. Chris and I both want to take, a longer look at some of these cards, given the opportunity to see the whole set, right, and to see it in its entirety, and really kind of absorb all of that graphic information.
Hmm.
So this is definitely not the end of the conversation on Skybox 91 basketball for us here at Art of the Card. But as always, we appreciate you guys tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to let us know if you have a favorite card from this set, perhaps an iconic one that comes to mind as you listen to this episode. Let us know in the comments below. Please do like, comment, and subscribe if you're able. And follow us on Instagram as well, where you can keep abreast of all the upcoming episodes and also network with all of the artists that we've had on and interviewed so far. Chris, this has been a fun one. I really enjoyed
Yeah.
this as we start to get more into the basketball season. Any final thoughts on the Skybox cards?
No, now I want to find the designer that worked on these or designers and see, similar to some of these other sets, like what backgrounds, like how many are there of this, like how many shapes were used? How did you, what you talked about? Did you pick the photo and match it with the shape, or did you have the shape and match the photo? Was it a little bit of both, give and take, on both of those approaches? So it would be interesting to get somebody that worked on this set to talk about that, because it was cool, and I think it'd be interesting to hear when they were tasked with this project, hey, I'd imagine there was probably an announcement saying, hey, we have this new technology
Yeah,
that we're
yeah.
going to try to run with it. So that's kind of a question that I still have that we would need to do a little more research on, but could be fun down the road to if we are able to figure that out. So
Yeah, Skybox graphics wizard, if you're out there and listening, we'd love to have you on the show. If anybody has any insights too, you can always drop us a line. DMs are open. Art of the Card on Instagram. Let us know.
all right, thanks everybody, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks so much.